for which we have already paid and will continue to pay. And now they steal this money from us. That's what's tragic.
I've been working as a lawyer for 20 years now. I would have to contribute to retirement for 48 years in total and work until 68 years old. It's not easy, and the problem isn't just the retirement system. The reform comes with a lot of other things. It comes with measures that introduce fast changes for workers.
No other government dared to go this far, not even under the dictatorship of the colonels. No one so dared to destroy our rights to retirement that we would consider a coup d'etat.
Well, that was the scene earlier this month as Greek workers from all sectors protested planned cuts to their pension program and more. This week, officials from the International Monetary Fund and the European Union arrived in Greece to review implementation of the so-called pain for gain plan. Pain for whom? Gain for whom? And are there lessons coming out of Europe for us? Help us drill down. We've got two very high-placed, lofty critics, people who I hope will help to make some of this discussion real. Richard Wolff is a professor of economics emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He's visiting the New School. And Michael Hudson is professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. He's also chief economic advisor, I just found out, to the state of Latvia. Well, welcome both. This is our chance to get some of this stuff straight. Because I think, like many people, we've been absorbing this news from Europe, knowing that there is messaging going on here meant for us, but at the same time unclear what's really going on. Let me start with you, Richard. I mean, are the basics that we're hearing true, that the European, particularly the Northern European social welfare model has proven itself a bust and people are waking up there, tightening their belts and getting down to making improvements?
No, I don't think that's correct. I think that's a carefully crafted message which has many ulterior motives behind it. In point of fact, the rise in unemployment, for example, in the United States has been much more severe than in Europe, and the suffering of our unemployed people has been much more severe than even those who are unemployed in Europe. And the reason for that is the social program. They have escaped the damage of this crisis relative to what's happened in the United States thanks to a social program, and I think they will fight hard to keep it.
But we've been told that suffering, at least for those at the lower end of the economic system, Michael, is somehow a good and salutary thing because, after all, we're in a crisis.
The idea is that the more you can lower wages, the more competitive a country will be. And that's not the case. The IMF and the EU have just got back from Latvia. I'm not an advisor to the government, but to the leading opposition party, Harmony Center. The Latvian economy has cut its wages by 30% in the last year. The IMF said you only have 15% to go. There is a 51% flat tax on labor in Europe. It's a Washington consensus absolute model. The lifespan is shortened by 10 years, as it has throughout the Soviet Union. 1/3 of the population between 20 and 35 intends to emigrate. Emigration is accelerating. The economy is being emptied out. And that is the IMF and the EU form of stabilization. These are for the post-Soviet economies, not the Northern Europe model, but the model where the Washington consensus and the IMF had a completely free hand to design an economy, and what they designed was 50% tax on labor, 0.1% tax on property.
But am I making this up? I mean, take a look at how PBS described what's happening in Greece. Here's a clip from the NewsHour.
Greeks have got accustomed to a level of consumption which is Northern European, combined with a business culture that is decidedly Middle Eastern, which is not really feasible, not very productive.
Then they go on to say that these non-productive public workers outnumber the state sort, and that's the problem. So what is it? Is it the economic crisis requiring the cuts that is the problem, or is it the planned cuts that are exacerbating some kind of social crisis?
Well, I think the way to see this is there's a process going on in which an economic crisis that no one in their right mind would attribute to the working people of Greece has produced the difficulty for a whole host of countries which are now going to be solved by crunching down on their people. There is a shifting of the cost of this crisis from those who produced it, whose speculations, whose bad loans were the cause of this, to the vast mass of the population, because those who caused it, having been bailed out by their governments, can now have to want, if you like, to shift that burden onto the mass of people, and the government is the agent for doing that, and that's going to produce an explosion.
But isn't the problem? I mean, you say people have to be out of their minds, but that's what I'm hearing all the time. It's the workers who get too large pensions, don't work hard enough, take these long vacations. Maybe we're told they're the problem because we work so hard and have so few vacations, but is there not a problem there, Michael?
The problem is that they've cut the taxes on the rich. The rich don't pay taxes anymore, and now that they don't, a government is borrowing from the European banks. There's no need for them to borrow. There's no reason why the government itself shouldn't create the money, just like we do in the United States. But they borrow from the banks, cut the taxes on the rich, and now they say, now that we're not taxing the wealthy, we're not taxing real estate, we're not taxing international corporations, now we have to stop paying the money that we owe the Greek workers for having given up their wage demands in the past, taking lower wages in exchange for security in their old age. The government says you were greedy to charge lower wages and want to be paid in the future. Only the rich get paid. Big fish eat little fish. That's the IMF principle.
If I could expand on it. The Greek workers with their pensions and their pay have been getting those pensions and those pay for 10, 20, 30 years, and we haven't had any complaint about it. And we've been proud, the Greeks have been proud, and the rest of Europe has been proud. Suddenly, it's unbearable. Well, that's not a coincidence. That's because we had a crisis, and a crisis cost the government a lot of money to bail out the banks. They have to recoup that money, so suddenly we're hearing about the lavishness under which these workers live. That's a transparent effort to shift the cost of this crisis.
I mean, it is true. It seems like 2 years ago we were hearing about the mortgage fraud and the scandalous betting, basically gambling on derivatives being the problem, and now somehow it's all social programs. Yeah. Here's what David Cameron, the new, I was going to say CEO of the UK, the Conservative leader, Prime Minister, he's talking about a big society solution. Take a look.
It's about liberation, the biggest, most dramatic redistribution of power from elites in Whitehall to the man and the woman on the street. For years, government has been about putting up barriers to local action.
The PM wants charities and voluntary groups to have a bigger role running local services.
The way that government has worked, top-down, top-heavy, controlling, has frequently had the effect of sapping responsibility, local innovation and civic action.
It makes it all make an awful lot of sense, don't you think, Richard?
I'm appalled, frankly. There's an extraordinary arrogance here. If the government withdraws, the power devolves onto the other institution that has all the resources in society, and that's called big business. The game about the man and woman in the street is a ploy and should be seen through for the